So, welcome to episode 3 of Scaffold Survey Writing Solutions podcast. Delighted to say that I'm joined today with Andrew Knight, and we will be discussing basically AI in the built and natural environment, mainly obviously focused around the surveying sector. But before we start, Andrew, did you want to introduce yourself and tell our avid listeners a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rodri. Yeah, I'm Andrew Knight from RICS. I've been with RICS for, it's 13 and a half years now and done various roles in public affairs and the standards team. And I now sit within our thought leadership and analytics part of the organisation. I have a long technical background going back many decades in sort of IT and technology. And so my role is to really look at the impact of AI, data and technology right across that built and natural environment. Because I think, as you know, it's a very broad area in terms of the number of practice areas that our members are involved in. And it is having an increasingly profound effect on the way we do deliver services for clients and maintain assets and develop them.
Absolutely, as I said, and as a kind of a software company where we try and at Scaffold we try and integrate AI into different areas as much as possible to make the lives easier. I think it was quite an avid topic to discuss with you. I'll kick off with a good question. So, how is AI currently being utilised in the surveying profession, both in the built and natural environments, from obviously your viewpoint? And could you provide some examples?
Yeah, surely. I mean, one of the challenges, I think, is it has already become fairly pervasive in terms of where people are using it. And sometimes it's not terribly obvious because it's kind of under the bonnet, if I can use that phrase, in terms of the applications that people might use. And although obviously over the last couple of years, there's been a huge kind of, perhaps hype is the wrong word, but a huge amount of interest sparked by these various kind of generative AI tools that are now out there. You know, AI has been around in various flavors for a long time. And I guess if you think across the kind of full life cycle of land and property to perhaps paint a picture of some of these examples, I mean, it begins really, very early on with the whole kind of measurement of land and geomatics and that area where you're seeing AI being used to interpret images which are gathered by drones or satellites for things like land, agricultural use, monitoring of crops, but also AI now increasingly being clever enough to kind of enable drones to be almost pilotless in terms of being able to fly beyond line of sight and calculate their own, travel plans, as it were, avoid collisions. So there's examples where AI is being used to kind of interpret that set of images, whether it's counting trees, whether it's counting deer, things that you don't really kind of imagine, but that sort of biodiversity agenda where it's being used in that way. If you think through to kind of planning and development, you've got examples where people are using AI to join together lots of different data sets, because quite often the challenge, if you're looking at a kind of development issue, is, well, I want a site to build 50 houses. Where can I do that in, say, Warwickshire or another county? And trying to identify down from a funnel of a lot of potential sites to a few sites that make sense in terms of planning restrictions, who owns the land, flood risk, all those kind of things you need to look at before you can actually physically jump in your car and do a site inspection. When it comes to construction, people using it to analyze cost data for benchmarking and sort of early cost advice. I know a firm in the US who developed some very clever machine learning to help schedule and reschedule very large construction projects, particularly large infrastructure and large built environment projects. You've then got a very fairly well-established use of machine learning and other kind of statistical AI approaches for valuation when it comes to looking at the valuation, particularly of residential properties. You'll know in certain jurisdictions like the UK, a lot of kind of valuation for lending purposes by mortgage providers is done through various forms of automated valuation. And clearly in your area, Rodri, we've got people now doing remote inspections to an extent, using machine learning to interpret images, to look at defects and provide some initial information, some initial kind of triage for surveyors as well. When you look at sort of asset management and modeling, your people extracting information from leases automatically now on the basis that particularly commercial leases can be quite long, detailed documents, and AI can be a useful tool rather, for extracting data. So that perhaps gives you a flavor. And I suppose to finish on one area where there's a lot of opportunity to from a green perspective, but also a financial perspective, is in the optimization of HVAC, particularly in commercial buildings, where you can use machine learning algorithms to really optimize based on sensor information on occupancy rates and environment and weather and climate conditions to really optimize HVAC, because quite often there are huge savings you can make by simply optimizing your HVAC to really sort of dial up and dial down that kind of HVAC at every point in the year and every point during the week, depending, as I say, on occupancy and other kind of factors.
So yeah, basically, in a nutshell, it is present in a huge amount of kind of sectors throughout the surveying. Let's go back a step quickly then. So just for, I mean, if I was to have this conversation with you, I don't know, 24 months ago, and you asked me AI, the only thing I'd really think of is either the film with Will Smith in, or your kind of chat GPT, or where you can ask it a question, it'll give you an answer. But what is AI? If you were to define it in a sentence or two, how would you explain what it is, as opposed to what you can do with it? What is it exactly?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one because there's no kind of standard sort of definition in the sense, and in fact, the definitions I tend to use come from things like the EU AI Act and the OECD have a definition, and they're deliberately quite broad because from their perspective, they want to make sure that as AI evolves and develops, they've got an overarching definition. But I guess the way I'd phrase it is that AI is essentially a machine-based system, a computer of some form that uses data and inputs to effectively produce inferences from that, whether that's producing some content, whether it's making a decision, whether it's offering some kind of advice, some kind of prediction. So it really is, and it's effectively trying to mimic the human brain. And I think it's worth reinforcing the point that AI is mimicking us in terms of the way we make decisions, make predictions. And you could argue that's good or bad, depending on your viewpoint of the quality of human decision-making sometimes. But it is a mimicking process. It's trying to mimic that human intelligence to perform a particular task. And it's worth remembering that AI is essentially, in whatever form you look at, whether it's ChatGPT or one of these generative tools or a machine learning program to optimize your HVAC, it's what they say probabilistic in nature. It's a statistical tool. It's looking for the most likely correlation, the most likely outcome, analyzing a set of data and looking for correlations and patterns in that way. And because of that, it's very powerful, but it can almost sometimes also be very, very dim because it can make quite obvious mistakes. I remember using a generative AI tool and I asked it to do a sort of visual design for me in terms of I think it was a house or an office, and it drew lots of very nice spaces in a kind of office setting, but it didn't put any doors in any of the actual rooms. So, and I'm sure, as we all know, Gen AI is getting more and more intelligent, and these things do get better and better, but it doesn't necessarily have any common sense. And so it does have an error rate. It does have the capacity to make silly mistakes. I'm sure people have seen some, many of those AI generated images on social media, and you see people with 6 fingers and things like that. So it does have an error rate, but it is very good at analyzing large amounts of data very quickly, and as I say, making predictions, generating advice, looking for patterns, recognizing images. But it isn't perfect, and it may be leaping ahead to a further discussion point, but I think it's really important to understand that AI is a tool that we should use as part of what we do, not as a replacement of what we do. It can replace some quite sort of low-level tasks in many ways, but I think particularly in a profession where we're giving advice, it's a tool that we should use in tandem with our experience and common sense. But it is a very wide range of tools, all of which effectively have this common attribute of automation, making predictions, generating content based on data input, and using statistical probabilistic methods to look at a potential outcome or a piece of analysis.
It's interesting you say about it being a tool and it should be worked in tandem with experience. For example, I often come across that question on a slightly different subject. When you talk about like surveying software, for example, people are like, oh yeah, but you don't have to be a good surveyor to do that anymore, because you could just use one of these flash survey writing solutions. There's plenty out there, but the argument is it doesn't replace the need for that experience, the competence of a surveyor, because all it does is it gives you options, or like you say in the AI aspect of things, it gives you data. You still need to go through that, what would we say, analytical process and deciding what's relevant, what's not relevant, what a cause is and stuff like that. So it can help, like you said, but I don't think, well, I'm sure there might be an element of learning in regards to AI. So you talk about how it does have an error rate. I mean, it'd be interesting to see if there's learning ability. We've got on Scaffold, we've got like some AI kind of use in dictation, and it does actually learn. I've got some really weird colloquialisms. The irony, I can't say the word. But when I first started using it, it wasn't great at putting like capital letters in front of brands or so on and so forth, or a couple of slang terminologies that I use from my Welsh and Cornish kind of heritage as such. But it has learned. So, you know, short of going to Skynet and the film Terminator, there is an element of learning about it as well. But what are the most significant advantages of AI in terms of not necessarily its ability to do the work for you, more helping with like data collection and analysis and decision making?
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of clarify that point you made about AI getting better, I mean, one of the main flavors of AI, and this pervades the foundation models, as they call it, that allow generative AI, is this sense of machine learning, that it will get better at a particular task, and it effectively learns through feedback, through various other training methods, as it's described. So you're right, AI does get better and better and better, and it will reach, to some extent, a bit of a ceiling for a particular task about how good it is, but it will get better. But I think back to your question, AI is very good, in my view, at doing the kind of more basic analytical data gathering, data analysis tasks that frees up the surveyor to do the kind of higher value advisory piece. You know, it is good at, and you can train it. I know a firm who started in Hong Kong, where you have a particular issue about doing facade inspections, where you have very closely packed buildings, very tall buildings, and they've actually used surveyors to tag pictures of common defects on the facades in that kind of environment in terms of the climate and the building pathology. And that's a very effective way of running drones up and down a building, looking for obvious defects, and then passing that almost triaged information to surveyors to then have a further look and do that analytical piece. So I think where AI, as you've described it there, with that kind of the report writing side, it's getting you started. It's doing a lot of the kind of grunt work, if I can use that phrase, that basic work to give you an initial draft of a report, an initial set of perhaps tagged photos to give you a sense of where you should start your investigations. But I think it will never, particularly in a sector where we have, and as you know, in your particular practice area, I wouldn't say every building is different, but to some extent they're all different. They're a different location. Yes, they may have a similar building pathology, but they'll have gone through a different history. They'll have, some defects that other ones don't have. There's nothing quite like recognizing that although you can automate a degree of data collection and a degree of report writing, you're looking at a singularly individual property with a singular history, a singular location, and for better or for worse, a fairly singular set of defects at that moment in time that need to be rectified. So I think where AI will be really good for the profession is as a real productivity tool to help us get to a stage early, more quickly, where we can begin to apply the professional expertise for that final reasoned advice for a client.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that kind of photo analysis. It's something that, okay, again, Scaffold, we're looking in the future, but the ability to take a photo of a chimney and it kind of help with defect analysis. And it's not, again, we're not looking to create a tool that will basically do a surveying job for you. I can't reiterate more the need for a surveyor, their competencies, qualities, and experiences. But it's just to help, point out something and give you a list of, it's that grunt work as such. The irony is, I thought about asking ChatGPT to ask the questions on this,
Yeah.
just out of irony more
Yeah.
than anything else. Asking about AI, but then I decided against it just because I wanted to kind of have a more of a say around what I was going to ask. But I would have been interested to see what AI would have wanted to discuss in regards to AI in surveying, which is a pretty sad thing to be happy about, but it is what it is. We've talked about obviously the positives and so on and so forth about AI in the built environment. What challenges or limitations do you see? You've talked about obviously its error rate, but yeah, what kind of challenges do you see in regards to integrating AI into, let's say, residential surveying practices, or surveying as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge for me is almost the danger, and I think it's similar with a lot of technology, is almost sort of abdicating responsibility to the technology rather than still retaining that professional skepticism, that ability to look at the data that you're being presented with and think, actually, does that make sense? Because you can take photographs of a building, and depending on the day and the lighting and the time of day, you may not get a perfect photograph, and there'll be things that will still be missed. So it's that element of due diligence that we still need to do, that I think there's a danger sometimes that technology can look very seductive to the extent that we trust it beyond its capabilities. And I think particularly in a real world profession where, we're not using AI as a tool, as a game thing here, it's actually really something that we can use as a tool to support what is a commercial transaction with the people who are paying for a survey, and the fact that we have to stand behind our opinions. Our PII insurers will expect us to have that due diligence and that audit trail. So I think there's a danger that on the one hand we delegate responsibility to the tech and don't, and it's not that we shouldn't trust it per se, but we should really be still rigorously thinking, okay, well, does this make sense? Which bits of the building have we not had a photograph from? Are there some shadows on that picture, for example? Are there some things that I still need to inspect that we simply haven't got? Or it may well be that actually this property, like many others, might have another kind of defect which is not going to be picked up by a physical photograph, for example. There are lots of areas where we still need to use that expertise. I think a more kind of perhaps profound longer term issue would be for the next generation of surveyors that we don't de-skill them. They don't lose the ability to do a survey from scratch almost, and say, actually, from first principles, with just my eyes and my ears and a notepad, how would I walk around a building? How would I assess a property without technology? Because I'm a strong believer in the kind of adage that you can't manage what you don't understand. So I don't see how a surveyor in 10 years' time who's never done surveys properly, if I can use that phrase, would be able to look at all the information gathered by some kind of automated AI process and be able to really have that kind of professional skepticism, that experience to think, well, no, you've missed something, or that's a false positive, or that's a false negative. I still think there's an issue there. I'm going to go and physically look at that part of the building. So I think there's a danger that we rely on it too much and therefore de-skill the next generation, and that we also remember that we need to stand by our advice, and therefore we should treat any data we receive with a degree of professional skepticism to make sure, yeah, that's correct. I've gone and inspected that particular bit of the building. Yes, I've seen a photograph. There is a defect there, and I'm going to go and double check that, and vice versa. I'm also going to walk around the property and see what that automated process may have missed. And, as you know, there are sometimes you walk into a room and your olfactory senses give you a sense of a problem which a photograph wouldn't pick up, or just the level of the ground. A photograph can't necessarily give you that kind of sense of the positioning of the property vis-a-vis the ground and other kind of issues like that. So
no, I mean, it goes back to the surveyor using it as a tool as opposed to a replacement. I mean, you talk about AI basically works on analysis of a massive collection of data, but a surveyor already has that. You have a 20-year-old veteran surveyor. I use the word veteran, not saying old, but you have that, and they've got 20 years worth of defects in their head, and they're analysing it every time they do a survey. That whether they realise it or not, they're using that experience that they've acquired over those years. It's no different to what AI does, but like you said, there comes the issue where people don't actually gain that 20 years of experience if they become too heavily reliant on AI. I guess is the problem. And also, I think you talk about people wanting to take a photo of a chimney and it highlights the defects. Yes, that has a purpose, but also sometimes that's actually the opposite way to how you would survey something, because you don't look at a defect and then see what the outcome is. You see what the outcome is and you follow the trail back to what the defect is. And you can't just take a picture of a damp wall and then expect AI to say, it will tell you it's damp, but it's not going to say that's damp because there's render on the outside of the building and it's bridged damp proof course, or blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So you always will need, again, I'm reiterating my personal perspective on it, you'll always need the competency and experience of a surveyor. And I think, and again, people say that survey writing software is along the same issue, is it doesn't give that experience, but that's where I massively disagree, because survey writing software isn't necessarily AI, it has it built in, but you still need a competent surveyor to interpret what they're seeing and input it into the software. But moving on, so looking more ahead, we've talked about what it's used for, the positives of it, the kind of restrictions on it. With it handling more technical tasks, how do you envision the role of a surveyor evolving in the future? Obviously, bearing in mind what you've already said about making sure it doesn't necessarily inhibit them gaining that experience that they need.
Yeah, I mean, I remain optimistic that I think whilst the surveyor's role will evolve, they will still be ultimately that final professional who really applies that kind of experience and reasoned advice onto what will be perhaps more of an automated process, insofar as they will have had quite a lot of information gathered for them in an automated way and triaged to some extent that they will actually think, okay, we've already got, as you say, yes, we've identified damp in a wall, but we're now going to go and need to check the render or the pointing or the guttering or the roof or whatever it may be. So it'll give them that kind of starter for 10, and actually it will make them more productive. I think what I would hope is that actually what it does for, not just in the kind of residential survey and valuation space, but more broadly, it frees up a lot of the time that is spent doing quite repetitive, dare I say, tedious tasks, and allows them to focus on really where they add value. Because I think all of us can think of days where we spend, whether it's something as prosaic as going through an inbox and saying, well, actually, could there have been some AI that would have helped us prioritize what we look at in our inbox, and perhaps automatically put certain emails into a folder that says not as important, you can wait a couple of weeks. It's these kind of quite a bit like the philosophy that I know the sort of cycling teams use for the Olympics, this idea of marginal gains, where you save 5% here of your time, another 5% over there, and you end up with a lot more time to work with your clients, to actually think about the advice you're giving, to really do the survey in an even better way and be more productive. I think we talked when we talked on the Tech Partner video about fundamentally the fact that we still are human beings who want a good work-life balance. Let's make sure that surveyors can work a sensible working week, but not be writing reports on a Sunday or writing reports on a Saturday night, because they're chasing their tail in terms of some of this admin and kind of basic work that AI can actually automate for us, and then leave the time for this really high value professional element of the role.
Absolutely. I said, with Scaffold, one thing that we're looking at is potentially helping surveyors, not the surveyors, but the surveying coordinators. That fundamentally is like that kind of data collection administration side of things. And it's simple things like why can't AI help with the booking of surveys in regards to what is the most efficient way to make the surveyors travel less distances? Which surveys can we book together? There's an app, not for surveying, just in general, diary app. I think it's called Motion.
Yeah.
And it's very clever. It's an AI powered task diary list, and it takes what you're doing or where you're doing it, and it reorganizes your diary and fills in the gaps and how long something's going to take. Why can't we apply that to the surveying industry as a whole, not just residential surveying, to help with diary management? Anywhere in surveying, it's very much a field orientated sector, which involves a lot of traveling, and obviously the quieter the market gets, the more a surveyor is expected to travel. And when you're traveling, it's dead time. You're sitting in the car and you can't do anything and be safe at the same time. So that is a really good point to make in regards to AI. Is not just about it doing the surveying task for you, it's the administrative side of things. And again, it's not so you can do more in one a day, it's so you can spend more time on the right areas to deliver a product. So if you are notoriously a handwriting surveyor that writes up a report, for example, that might take you 3, 4, 5 hours to write a quality report. Survey writing software, again, I always revert back to it because it's obviously my field of work.
Yeah.
But you can get that that administrative process down. You don't have to spend hours fiddling around with photos. You don't have to spend hours going through standard paragraphs, copying and pasting and this and whatever, because people still do that. It's the same process, but it streamlines it, and it just enables you to spend more time looking at those defects and making sure that report you written, the report you have written is to the standard that your client deserves, and it will give them the relevant information and detail that helps them with their purchase or not, which is sometimes the case. So again, with all we've talked about in mind, final couple of questions. How should the surveying profession prepare for widespread adoption of AI? And again, I'm not talking about the detail of taking a photo and it telling you, but we've talked about a number of different areas in which it's already in place. But how would this evolve? And are there specific areas of education or professional development that surveyors should possibly look at prioritising moving forward?
Yeah, I think sort of education and awareness is the key. I mean, I don't think it's a technology we should be scared of. I mean, that there's always this sort of doomsday idea that it will replace various job roles around society, and I don't think that will be the case by and large. I think, as ever, it's about being curious, doing a bit of learning about what AI actually means. And when I say not being scared of it, just realizing it is fundamentally a productivity tool that if we use it responsibly and still apply our professional expertise and skepticism, it will be very valuable. And as you say, I think, and if we almost change the focus, I think, as you've alluded, that surveyors in general are also running businesses, so they want to be productive in general, as well as using technology for the surveying, practice area itself. Do think about, well, is there technology out there that will simply streamline my business that uses AI, as you say, to journey plan? Because you're in a reasonably rural setting down in sort of, the West Country, you could end up going from one side of Cornwall to the next, or dipping into Devon or wherever, journey planning.
We don't. I don't dip into Devon.
Tamar Bridge, west of the Tamar Bridge. But no, joking aside, journey planning in a situation like that could be quite critical. You could end up going from Penzance to Saltash in one day, and that's not probably terribly effective. So, it is looking at AI as this tool that can automate in a responsible way a number of your processes to make you more productive. But I think, for me, it's fundamentally being curious, exploring what's out there, understanding the limitations, understanding that these things aren't silver bullets, that they still need, as you said, this sort of human oversight, the ability to, because, there's some very, almost every time I join a kind of virtual call now, somebody's got their AI note taker in the corner, so it can take notes, it can summarize a meeting. But as ever, you still need to read those notes and think, well, has it missed something? Has it garbled something? Are those the right action points? Am I happy to send those out to the attendees? And you do need to look at it and make some corrections and edit it in that way. So as ever, it's providing you with great raw material, but we all know that raw material needs that professional skepticism, that interpretation. So I would say to the profession in general, we need to embrace it, because it is another productivity tool that's come out of the technology sector that we should use, but we should use it responsibly. We don't need to become data scientists and learn to program. It's not about that, but it's about understanding, and particularly if we're being sold a tool that has AI in it, I think we need to learn as a profession just to ask the right questions. Well, okay, you say it's AI, can you explain in basic lay people's terms how it works? What has it done? If it was trained on images, for example, let's use a specific example. If it was trained on defect images, has it been trained on the kind of buildings I work on? Because if you train AI on a lot of, office blocks and kind of typical things that you might see inside an office block in terms of M&E type defects or other defects based on a particular building pathology, it's not going to be a lot of use in Lewin Port, or Penzance, is it? Because you've got just totally different building pathologies, and AI does stand and fall on the quality of the data that is used to train and to drive the program. And I say, if you've got a whole bunch of photographs, of high-story residential blocks in Hong Kong, that's not going to work very well for West Country residential surveying. By definition, it's entirely the wrong kind of data. So those kind of almost simple questions of, okay, well, how does it work? What's it been trained on? And think also that just the issues of liability, the real world issues, that we still need to stand behind our work output, and therefore we have to have that overall supervision. But as a profession, we need to embrace it, decide which tools are going to help us be more productive, and use them on that basis.
So, final question for you then. Looking to the future, what potential innovations in AI could further revolutionize the surveying industry? It's a broad question, I appreciate. And I'm sure you could talk about this for hours. But what are your kind of main highlights that you think is in the future from your unique perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the various generative AI tools will get better. I think, like a lot of things, they'll reach a kind of a ceiling about how good they are, depending on the kind of data that they're able to be trained on. But they will get more powerful and more reliable. I think one area where I think the whole built environment has a challenge, and thus an opportunity that AI can help us with, is that a lot of the data that we have to rely on is not in a very structured form. And what I mean by that, if you think of if you did due diligence on a residential property and have to pull the title report and perhaps get an old copy of the boundary map or some of the information around planning, a lot of that is still held in document form. So it's quite laborious to sort of pull that information in and analyze it. And where AI, I think, can be very powerful soon is turning this kind of unstructured document type data into more structured data that can give you more analytical power to do some of these very kind of clever bits of analysis and reporting. So I think what AI will do is probably help the built environment as a whole get much better data on all its assets. If we think of some of the challenges recently around RAC, for example, it's a good example of how the built environment hasn't been very good at curating data on all the assets we have. And there's a lot of talk about property passports and digital twins and logbooks. And at a very granular level for residential property, if we think of the buying selling process, when you try and put all the documents together to do due diligence, that's quite a challenge, because you've got bits of paper floating around, effectively fencer guarantees, or guarantees from your damp proof course contractor as a bit of paper, and old planning documents and building regs and certificates, gas safe, whatever. If we can get AI to kind of bring that data together and interpret it and start reading title reports and giving us an initial title report, for example, I think there's a lot of power there to kind of manage documents better. And similarly with the construction process, managing all the documents and the variations and the contractual issues, using AI to manage those documents better, I think will be a big game changer for the whole sector.
It's interesting. So a lot of the kind of conversation we've had around AI, I'll be honest, it didn't necessarily go down where I thought it might, because your kind of viewpoint is AI should be focusing on the menial task. Menial is not the word, but
I know what you mean.
Kind of data collection,
as
opposed to analysis and doing stuff for you. I mean, you get some people, they use AI, they'll go on, again, ChatGPT or all the other ones that are similar. Who is the best surveyor in the area? And it will give them an answer.
Yeah.
Where the answer comes from is not the opinion of ChatGPT or whatever the software you're using. It's very much data analyzed from 5-star reviews, or someone might be on a table or something like that. So I think before you embrace AI, I think you're right. You need to almost start having disclaimers or details as where that AI is generating its knowledge from.
Exactly.
So in summary, there are massive benefits in your opinion, to AI. A lot of that focus, as I've just expressed, is on the kind of making the job easier by doing the more labor-intensive, administrative tasks more automated. I was going to say automatedly.
Yeah.
But you can't replace the experience of, and this is across the whole build and natural environment, the surveyor and their experience and their competence AI is just going to be a tool to help us be more efficient with our time, as opposed to make the job easier by doing more of the decision making for us. Would you agree with that? Is that a fair comment?
I think so, yeah, and I think what the profession should do is recognizing that there is this opportunity to automate these tedious, these repetitive tasks, and keep focusing on where they can really bring value to their clients, which is this knowledge of a incredibly wide-ranging, idiosyncratic asset type, which is we're not looking at a commodity type asset. There is a huge variance in the state and quality of assets. So yeah, I think it is about that. I mean, the final comment I would make, I saw a lovely kind of meme on social media that says, I don't want AI to write novels and write films. I want it to do the washing up and the laundry.
So you can have time to sit down and watch a film or create a film, create what's on. Well, that's a great note to finish on. Andrew, thank you so much for your time and your unique insight into this kind of sector. I no doubt believe that people will find it very interesting. So again, thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to catching up with you about RICS Tech Partners moving forward in regards to Scaffold, but another needless plug. So thank you very much. And yes, have a good day.
And you.